Of all the crises that have happened over the centuries, the Cuban Missile Crisis may be the single most influential crisis in terms of shaping how we have come to think about how crises happen, how they escalate, and how they're resolved in international politics. There are a number of reasons for this, but the Cuban Missile Crisis has really become the archetype for how we think about crisis bargaining, at least in the West. Since the Cuban Missile Crisis, there's been an explosion of scholarship in the United States and elsewhere about coercion and international confrontations, and most of that scholarship refers back either explicitly or implicitly to the Cuban Missile Crisis as a model for understanding how crises happen. My view is that this is problematic, that we've come to think about crises as sort of fitting the structure of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where you have a clear initiation, a clear threat, a short and sharp period of escalation, and then a clear resolution at the end. Although this is easy, I think, for game theorists to describe, I don't think it actually describes how most crises play out. Instead of being short and sharp, many crises are drawn out and simmer for a very long time. I think the crises in South Asia actually fit this description much better than they do the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think one other problem with the Cuban Missile Crisis is that it has given us the misleading impression that leaders are extremely concerned during crises about the risk of something going wrong. The Cuban Missile Crisis, of course, is famous for both President John F. Kennedy and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev being concerned about the risk of accidental war. And President John F. Kennedy famously had read a book called The Guns of August, which describes how rigid military plans carried Western Europe into war in 1914 inadvertently. And so during the crisis, he was very concerned about this possibility. But in my own research, I found that leaders tend not to be all that conscious of the risks of inadvertence and the risks of accidents. They tend to believe they have more control than they really do. And so the Cuban Missile Crisis in this respect is really an exception rather than the rule, in the sense that leaders on both sides were really quite cognizant of the possibility that something might go wrong, whereas I think in most crises, that risk tends not to dominate leaders' minds.